At the guardianship, hearing my husband held my hand in front of everyone, leaned close to my ear, and whispered gently, "Just a few more hours. And you won't be clear-minded enough to sign anything anymore. Let me take care of everything for you." Everyone in the courtroom believed he was a devoted husband trying to save his sick wife. But what they didn't know was that for the past 11 days, I had secretly hidden every pill he handed me each morning. That night, a former FBI agent placed a thick file on the table, looked me straight in the eyes, and said, "Someone has been poisoning you very slowly, and he believes you have no way out left. I want to take a moment to say I am so grateful you chose to spend your time here with me. Before the story begins, tell me in the comments, what city or country are you joining from today? I love knowing who is in the room. Also, a quick note. Some details in this story are fictional shaped for meaning and reflection. Names and locations are coincidental, but every lesson in it is worth keeping. The first thing I noticed that morning was my hands. I was standing at the bathroom mirror trying to button the collar of my blouse, the cream-colored one I always wore to court appearances, because it made me look composed like the woman I had spent 30 years becoming, and my fingers would not cooperate. A fine, quiet tremor moved through them. Not dramatic, not the kind that knocks things over, just enough that the button kept slipping, kept refusing, kept reminding me that something was wrong in a way I could no longer explain away. I pressed both palms flat against the counter and looked at myself. 57 years old, not by any honest measure. I ran 3 pharmacy locations across Savannah, reviewed quarterly audits without reading glasses, and hiked Tybee Island every Saturday morning with my oldest friend, Ruth Hansen. 57 was not the age at which a woman's hand started shaking over a button on a blouse she had buttoned 100 times before. And yet, I finished dressing and walked to the kitchen. Raymond was already there. My husband of 4 years stood at the counter with his back to me, arranging my morning medications into the small glass dish he had started using 6 months ago. His idea offered so naturally that I had accepted it without a second thought. Raymond Caldwell was 52, lean silver at the temples, with the kind of patient, unhurried confidence that had drawn me in when we met at a church fundraiser back in the spring of 2021. He had pursued me slowly and deliberately, remembering every small thing I ever mentioned, showing up exactly when I needed someone to show up. I had mistaken that patience for devotion. I was no longer certain what it was. "Morning, sweetheart." He turned and held out the dish. "You sleep okay?" "Not particularly," I said. He tilted his head, warm and concerned. "This hearing today has you wound up. That's understandable." He pressed the glass of water into my other hand. "Take these first, then eat something before we leave." I looked down at the medications. 2 prescriptions, 4 supplements, the same combination every morning for the past 8 months, ever since Raymond had gently suggested that a structured supplement regimen might help with my fatigue. My own cardiologist had approved the additions without much scrutiny. I had trusted that. I had trusted all of it. I closed my hand around the dish. "Dr. Holloway's office called yesterday," Raymond said, turning back to the counter. "He wants to move up your cognitive evaluation. Said some results from your last visit gave him pause." I set the dish down carefully. "He told me everything looked fine." Raymond glanced over his shoulder. "Sweetheart, you've been forgetting things. You said so yourself 2 Sundays ago after church." I had said no such thing. I picked the dish back up and swallowed the pills without another word. Not because I was certain they were harmless, but because if I broke the routine now, Raymond would know something had shifted. And the only edge I had left, the only one, was that he still believed I suspected nothing. That was the one thing I intended to protect. I had begun keeping records 11 days ago, a small leather notepad kept inside my purse and never left in the house. Every morning I wrote down the time what I had taken and what followed in the hours afterward, the heavy fatigue that arrived like a tide every afternoon, the dizziness when I stood too quickly, the way my thoughts sometimes arrived, half a beat late, like a signal losing its strength. My doctor called it stress. Raymond called it overwork. I had started calling it something else quietly only to myself because I was not ready to say it out loud until I had more than a feeling to stand on. 3 mornings ago, I had palmed one of the supplement capsules instead of swallowing it, slipping it into a small plastic bag inside my coat pocket, while Raymond's back was turned. I did the same the following morning, and the morning after that. 3 bags now tucked behind the spare blankets on the high shelf of the hall closet, somewhere Raymond would never think to look. I had no proof yet, just instinct, a symptom log, and 30 years of knowing exactly what a medication irregularity looked like. My father had told me once, standing behind the original dispensing counter on Broughton Street when I was 22, and thought I understood everything already. Margaret, a pharmacy is not just medication. It is documentation. Every transaction leaves a trail. Your job is to make sure the right people can read it. He meant DEA compliance records, insurance audits, inventory logs. I was beginning to understand the principle applied to a great deal more than pharmaceuticals. Raymond picked up his keys and looked at me with that expression I had seen so many times, steady, devoted, the portrait of a concerned husband. Ready. I'll drive myself, I said. I'll meet you there. Something moved behind his eyes, a flicker, quick and small, there and gone before I could name it. Then the smile returned, smooth and easy. Of course. Whatever makes you comfortable. I watched him walk out the front door, and I stood in the kitchen alone listening to the particular quality of the silence he left behind. Then I went to the hall closet, reached past the blankets, and transferred all 3 plastic bags into my purse. I did not know yet whose hands I would put them in. I did not know what a lab would find inside those capsules. But I knew this with the certainty of 3 decades behind a dispensing counter. Something was entering my body that I had not chosen and had not consented to. And Raymond Caldwell, who thought he was walking into that courthouse this morning with a sick and confused wife on his arm, had no idea that the woman beside him had already started building her case. The Chatham County Probate Court smelled the way all old courthouses smell, like wood polish and paper, and something faintly metallic, the accumulated weight of every argument that had ever been made within its walls. I had been here twice before in my life. Once when my father filed the original business trust documents in 1989. Once when I renewed the pharmacy's controlled substance license 7 years ago. Both times I had walked in feeling certain of the outcome. This morning I was not certain of anything. I found a parking spot 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance slowly, not because I was tired, but because I needed the time. The July heat was already sitting heavy on Bay Street, the kind of heat that makes the air look slightly wavy above the pavement, and I was grateful for it. Grateful for anything ordinary. Grateful for the sound of my own heels on the sidewalk, steady, and even nothing like the trembling I had noticed in my hands that morning. Raymond was waiting at the top of the courthouse steps. He looked exactly as he always looked, in public press shirt, easy posture, the particular kind of calm that comes not from peace of mind but from practice. He smiled when he saw me, and for a moment, just a moment, the length of a breath, I almost smiled back out of habit. 14 months of marriage will do that to a person. The body remembers warmth even when the mind has started asking questions. "You walked," he said, falling into step beside me. "I parked on Barnard. I would have driven you." He held the door open. "You should have said." "I wanted the air," I told him. Inside the hallway was cooler, lined with wooden benches, worn smooth by decades of people waiting for things they could not control. Patricia Owens was already there, standing near the respondent's table with a leather folder tucked under one arm and the expression she always wore before a difficult proceeding, not nervous, not confident, simply present. The kind of stillness that comes from knowing exactly what she is doing. She caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod. I returned it. Raymond steered me gently toward the front row of the gallery, his hand at the small of my back, and I let him. I was paying attention to everything, the layout of the room, the position of the clerk, the faces of the few people scattered across the gallery benches, maybe 30 people total, a slow morning for Chatham County Probate Court, which suited me fine. The Honorable Margaret Elaine Booker presided, a woman in her mid-60s with silver hair and reading glasses. She wore low on her nose, giving her the appearance of someone perpetually unimpressed. I had heard Patricia mention her once as the kind of judge who has seen every trick and is allergic to all of them. I found this reassuring. The petition was called at 9:47. Raymond's attorney, a man named Gerald Forsyth, compact and precise with the bearing of someone who charged by the 6-minute increment, presented the emergency filing in 11 minutes. He cited Maggie's recent cognitive irregularities, referenced a letter from Dr. Holloway, and used the word concerned 7 times. Each time he said it, I wrote a small mark in the corner of my notepad. 7 marks. Patricia responded with a motion to dismiss on procedural grounds, and in the alternative requested a 30-day continuance for an independent neurological evaluation by a physician of the respondent's choosing. Judge Booker asked 3 questions, all of them sharp, none of them directed at Forsyth's favor. She granted the continuance without elaboration, set a return date, and moved to the next matter on her docket in the same breath. 11 minutes in, 14 minutes out. The whole proceeding had the brisk efficiency of something that had not gone the way one party intended. Raymond's expression did not change. That was the thing about Raymond. His face was a very well-maintained surface. You had to watch his hands instead. And his hands, as we stood to leave, were very still in a way that hands are only still when a person is actively making them so. We filed out into the hallway. Patricia walked ahead to speak with the clerk. Forsyth was behind us, gathering his papers. Raymond guided me toward a wooden bench near the far end of the corridor, away from the main foot traffic tucked into the angle where the hallway turned toward the side exit. It was the kind of spot you would choose if you wanted a private word. I let him lead me there because I wanted to hear what he considered worth saying in private. He sat close. His voice when he spoke was almost tender. "This is just a delay," he said. "You know that. Booker gave Patricia a continuance because that's what judges do when they want to appear balanced. It doesn't change anything." "No," I agreed. "It doesn't." He looked at me for a moment with something I could not immediately name. Then he leaned slightly closer and his voice dropped to just below conversational, not a whisper exactly, but the register a person uses when they believe they are not being overheard. "Just a few more weeks, sweetheart," he said, "and then I won't have to keep doing this." I did not move. I did not blink. I kept my eyes on the middle distance and my hands folded in my lap, still the way my father taught me, and I absorbed the sentence the way you absorb a physical impact, by not fighting it, by letting it pass through you and settle somewhere you can examine it later. "And then I won't have to keep doing this." He straightened his jacket and said something about parking validation. I told him I would meet him outside. He walked away down the corridor, and I sat on that bench and breathed very carefully for the count of 10. "Maggie." The voice came from slightly behind me and to the left. I turned. Ruth Hanson was lowering herself onto the bench beside me, her canvas tote bag balanced on her knees, her reading glasses still pushed up on her head from whatever she had been doing before she arrived. Ruth was 63 years old and had been my friend for 30 of them. She had been a paralegal for 22 years before her retirement, and she had the particular quality of all good paralegals. She noticed things and filed them away without making a production of it. "How long have you been sitting there?" I asked. "Long enough," she said. We looked at each other. "Did you hear what he said?" I asked. "Most of it." Her voice was even. The way a person's voice is even when they are making a deliberate decision not to let it be anything else. "The last part, clearly." I nodded. I did not say anything more about it, and neither did she, because neither of us needed to. 30 years of friendship produces its own shorthand. She reached into her tote bag and produced a small spiral notebook, the kind with the wire binding and the lined pages, and she set it on her knee and uncapped a pen. "Tell me what time it is," she said. I looked at my phone. 10:23. She wrote the time in the notebook. Then she wrote the date. Then she wrote the location, Chatham County Probate Court Main Corridor East Wing Bench. She wrote it with the careful precision of someone who has spent 2 decades making sure that what happened and where it happened and when it happened were never in dispute. "Ruth, let me do this," she said quietly. "You know what this is. You know what it could be worth." I did know. A notarized contemporaneous account of what Raymond had said, recorded by a third-party witness who had been a legal professional for 22 years, written within minutes of the incident. In a Georgia courtroom, that was not nothing. That was something that could stand on its own. Ruth wrote for 4 minutes without stopping. When she was done, she capped the pen and looked at the page. "I'll get this notarized at the bank on Bull Street before noon," she said. "I'll send a copy to Patricia this afternoon. You don't have to, Margaret Ann Caldwell." She said my full name the way she only did when she was serious, which was rare enough that it always worked. "You have been my friend since we were both young enough to think we had all the time in the world. I am not going to sit on a courthouse bench and pretend I did not hear what I heard." She tucked the notebook back into her bag and snapped the clasp shut with a decisiveness that ended the conversation. "Now, are you hungry? Because I am, and there is absolutely no reason we cannot get coffee before you do whatever comes next." I almost laughed. It came out as something quieter, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh, somewhere in between. The sound a person makes when they are grateful in a way that has no better expression. "Yes," I said. "Coffee sounds right." We stood together and walked toward the main entrance, the morning light coming through the tall courthouse windows in long, pale columns. My phone buzzed once in my coat pocket. A text from Patricia. "We need to meet tonight. Not the office. Call me when you're alone." I read it twice. Then I put the phone away and walked out into the Savannah heat alongside Ruth Hanson, who was already talking about the cafe on Broughton Street that had the good cold brew. And I let her talk. And I listened, and I thought about what Patricia's text meant. Because I already had a feeling that tonight would be the night the shape of everything changed. Patricia Owens lived in a white 2-story house on Jones Street, 3 blocks from Forsyth Park, the kind of Savannah address that said old money without needing to announce it. I had been inside her home exactly twice before, once for a Christmas gathering, once when her husband passed and I brought food. Tonight made 3. She opened the door before I knocked. "I saw your headlights," she said, stepping back to let me in. She was still in her court-clothes jacket, off reading glasses pushed up on her head. Patricia Owens did not own a casual version of herself. "Come to the kitchen, and before you say anything, I need to tell you there's someone else here." I stopped walking. "Who?" "His name is Frank Delano. He's a private investigator, former FBI. I contacted him 2 weeks ago after Raymond filed the petition." She held my gaze steady. "I should have told you sooner. I'm telling you now." I looked at her for a long moment. Patricia had handled my business contracts since I opened the second pharmacy location in 2004. In 21 years, she had never made a move without telling me first. The fact that she had made one now told me she was more worried than she had let on in that courtroom. "All right," I said, "show me." Frank Delano was sitting at Patricia's kitchen table with a legal pad and a cup of coffee he had not touched. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, broad through the shoulders with the kind of stillness that former law enforcement people carry even after they leave the job. He stood when I walked in. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, "I've heard a great deal about you." "I hope some of it was useful," I said, and sat down. Patricia poured me tea without asking and took the chair across from Frank. "Tell her what you told me." Frank opened the legal pad. "I've been doing preliminary background on Raymond Caldwell for the past 10 days. Nothing invasive: public records, financial filings, professional history. What I found is enough to suggest this situation is more deliberate than a marriage going wrong." He paused. "Raymond has $1.8 million in documented debt, gambling primarily, most of it offshore accounts, but 3 creditors are domestic, and they've been pushing hard for the past 8 months. I set my tea down. 8 months. The timing matches when he began managing your medications," Patricia said quietly. The kitchen was very still. Outside, a car moved slowly down Jones Street, headlights sweeping briefly across the window. None of us spoke for a moment. "He needs liquidity," Frank continued. Your trust assets are substantial, but they're structured. He can't access them directly as your spouse. However, if he gains legal guardianship over you or power of attorney, he controls your decision-making. He can direct your medical care influence your business decisions and position himself to restructure the trust over time through a compliant trustee. I looked at Patricia, which is why he pushed the cognitive evaluation. A diagnosis of diminished capacity, even a mild one, gives him grounds to pursue guardianship aggressively, she said. Dr. Holloway's letter was the first piece of that argument. Holloway has been Raymond's physician recommendation for 14 months, Frank added. Not yours originally. I thought about all the mornings I had swallowed those pills without question. All the afternoons I had attributed my exhaustion to overwork. All the moments I had doubted my own mind because the man sleeping beside me had spoken about my forgetfulness with such careful, loving concern. What's the difference, I asked, keeping my voice level, between guardianship and a power of attorney for people watching this who may not know? Patricia answered without hesitation. She had explained this before in other contexts to other clients. A power of attorney is a document you sign yourself voluntarily designating someone to make decisions on your behalf. You control who gets that authority, and you can revoke it any time you're competent to do so. Guardianship is different. That goes through the court. A judge appoints the guardian, and once that happens, the court can take away your authority over the areas placed under guardianship, medical, personal, and sometimes financial, regardless of what you want. You become, legally speaking, a ward. I let that word sit in the air for a moment. Ward. He wants the court to make me a ward, I said. That's what the petition is designed to achieve, Patricia said, which is why your first move needs to happen before his does. She slid a folder across the table. Inside was a document I recognized, the Caldwell Family Trust, established in 2009, years before I ever met Raymond. I had structured it carefully at my attorney's advice to protect the pharmacy assets from any future liability. There was a clause buried in Section 7 that I had signed and largely forgotten about. Successor Trustee Clause. In the event the primary trustee, me, became subject to a legal competency challenge, control of the trust would transfer automatically to a designated independent trustee. Raymond had never been named anywhere in that document. This activates the moment his guardianship petition advances to a formal hearing, Patricia said. He loses access to any trust decisions automatically before a judge rules on anything. He doesn't know about it, I said. He didn't read the trust document carefully enough when he married you, Frank said. Most people don't. I closed the folder. My hands, I noticed, were perfectly still. There's one more thing, Frank said. He picked up his legal pad and turned it toward me. On it was a single question written in block letters. When did you last personally review the inventory shrink report for your pharmacy locations? I looked at the words. Shrink report, the internal document that tracked inventory losses, discrepancies between what was ordered and what was actually on the shelves. I reviewed it quarterly usually, but in the past 3 months, Raymond had been offering to pull the summaries for me, presenting me with a neat one-page version while I was tired while the afternoon fog was settling in. I had not looked at the raw data myself since April. Why, I asked, though something in my chest already knew why. Frank's expression did not change, because I pulled the last 90 days myself this afternoon, and Mrs. Caldwell, there are numbers in there that should not exist. I did not sleep that night. I lay in bed beside Raymond, listening to him breathe slow, and even the sleep of a man with a clean conscience, or no conscience at all, and I stared at the ceiling until 4 in the morning. Then I got up quietly, made coffee, and waited for 6 o'clock when I could leave without it seeming unusual. Raymond was still asleep when I pulled out of the driveway. Calvin Reese was already inside the pharmacy when I arrived. He had been with me for 8 years, 34 years old, lean and precise, the kind of IT specialist who treated every server like a patient in his care. Frank Delano had called him. The previous evening explained enough to get him moving, and Calvin had spent the night pulling data without being asked twice. That was the thing about people who had worked for you long enough. You did not have to explain why. You just had to ask. He looked up from his monitor when I walked in, and his expression told me everything before he said a word. "How bad?" I asked. "Sit down, Mrs. Caldwell." I sat. Calvin turned the monitor so I could see it clearly. This is the inventory shrink report for all 3 locations last 90 days. Shrink report tracks the difference between what we order, what we receive, and what we actually dispense or have on hand. Any gap is a loss, theft, breakage, data entry error, or dispensing without proper documentation. "I know what a shrink report is, Calvin." "Yes, ma'am, I know you do." He pointed to a column of figures highlighted in yellow. "These are the losses I can't explain. 3 compounds, all controlled or restricted classification. Small amounts, each time small enough that the automated alert threshold never triggered. But over 90 days, the pattern is consistent. Same compounds, same approximate quantities, always on the same days of the week." I leaned forward. The 3 compounds listed meant nothing to a layperson, but to me, they were immediately recognizable. One was a phenobarbital derivative, a compound used in palliative care settings to manage severe anxiety and agitation in terminal patients. In clinical doses administered correctly, it was a legitimate medication. In small, repeated doses given to someone without a diagnosis, without monitoring, without their knowledge, it would cause exactly what I had been experiencing: fatigue, cognitive slowing, dizziness. The gradual, plausible deterioration of a woman whose husband kept telling everyone she was declining. I sat back in my chair. "Calvin," I said carefully, "who has system access to log inventory entries?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he typed a command and brought up a second screen. "Dispensing pharmacists, the warehouse manager, the lead technician at each location, and—" He stopped. "And," I said, "and user ID RC-04. He did not look at me when he said it. RC-04 was added to the system 14 months ago with administrative-level access. Inventory entry order approval report generation. The access was authorized by you, Mrs. Caldwell. Your digital signature is on the approval form." The room was very quiet. The refrigeration units hummed in the back. Somewhere outside, a delivery truck rumbled past on the street. I remembered signing that form. Raymond had brought it to me on a Sunday afternoon, explained it as a practical measure. If something happened to me unexpectedly, if I was traveling, he could step in and keep operations running smoothly. It had seemed reasonable. It had seemed like something a thoughtful husband would think of. "Show me the timestamps," I said. Calvin pulled up the detailed log. Every inventory entry flagged as anomalous had been made between 7 and 8 in the evening on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the 2 evenings each week, when I reliably left the pharmacy early, and Raymond had standing access to the building through the key I had given him. He wasn't guessing, I said more to myself than to Calvin. He knew the shift schedule. He knew who was on duty and when the floor would be lightest. "There's something else." Calvin hesitated. The entries themselves, the ones logging these compounds, as dispensed, they reference doctor authorization codes. But when I cross-reference the codes against the prescription records, 3 of the authorizations come back to a Dr. Gerald Simmons. I did not recognize the name immediately. Then I did. Gerald Simmons. Raymond had mentioned him once offhandedly as a physician colleague he occasionally golfed with. A man Raymond had introduced into my professional orbit so casually that I had not thought to question it. "Pull everything connected to Simmons," I said. "Every authorization, every prescription, every patient record, linked to his codes through our system." Calvin nodded and began typing. While he worked, I took out my phone and called Frank Delano. He answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Caldwell." "RC-04, I said. "Raymond has been making inventory entries on Tuesday and Thursday evenings for 3 months. The compounds missing match what would produce my symptoms. And there's a physician named Gerald Simmons whose authorization codes are attached to at least 3 of the entries. I need you to find out who Simmons is to Raymond." A brief silence. Then, "I'll have something for you by tomorrow morning. One more thing. Calvin is pulling the full audit trail now. If Raymond realized we were looking at this data, he'd try to delete it," Frank said. "Can he?" Calvin answered without looking up from the keyboard. He can delete the primary server logs. He has the access level for it. He paused. But he doesn't know about the off-site backup server. It syncs automatically every 6 hours. Whatever he deletes on the primary, I still have a clean copy of. I exhaled slowly. Keep that backup locked, I told Calvin. Generate a hash verification on every file tonight so we can prove the data hasn't been altered. And Calvin... I waited until he looked at me. Don't tell anyone what you found. Not yet. Not until I say so. He nodded once. Understood. I stood and walked to the window that looked out over the rear parking lot. The lot was empty and still under the yellow security lights. But as I stood there, I noticed something I had not seen before. The small camera mounted above the rear entrance, the one that covered the loading dock and the side access gate, was blinking red. A steady, slow blink. The kind that meant the camera had recorded something recently and the storage was nearly full. I turned back to Calvin. When did we last clear the parking lot camera? He frowned and checked his tablet. It should clear automatically every 2 weeks. Last clear was... He stopped. His frown deepened. Mrs. Caldwell, the last automatic clear failed. There's footage on there going back 43 days. 43 days of whatever had happened in that parking lot after hours. I did not yet know what the camera had captured, but Raymond had been in and out of this building on Tuesday and Thursday evenings for 3 months, and now I knew he had not always been alone. I did not sleep that night. I had turned off the lamp, pulled the covers up, listened to Raymond's even breathing beside me in the dark. He always slept well. I had once found that comforting, the steadiness of it, the way his breathing never changed regardless of what the day had held. Now I lay in the dark and listened to it and thought about what it meant that a person could sleep that soundly while doing what he was doing. At 2:17 in the morning, I gave up. I went to the kitchen, made chamomile tea I did not drink, and sat at the table with my notebook open to a blank page. I wrote nothing. I just needed the notebook in front of me. It was the same reason my father kept a legal pad on his desk even during phone calls, not to write on, but to remind himself that whatever he was dealing with had a shape, and shapes could be managed. Calvin called at 2:49. I picked up before the second ring. I know it's late, he said. He did not sound apologetic. He sounded like a man who had also not been sleeping. Someone accessed RC-04 tonight, 40 minutes ago, from a remote terminal. I set down my pen. The primary server. Yes. They deleted 11 entries, the flagged ones, from the shrink report. Timestamps, batch references, authorization codes, gone from the primary. He paused. But not from the backup. Tell me about the backup. Separate network, off-site sync every 6 hours. RC-04 has no access credentials on that system. I made sure of that when I set it up, because I never liked the idea of one account having reach into both environments. Another pause, shorter this time. The backup is clean, Mrs. Caldwell. Hashes confirmed at the last sync cycle 3 hours ago. Everything that was deleted from the primary tonight is still sitting on the backup intact with a timestamp showing it existed before the deletion. I exhaled slowly. So the deletion actually helps us. That's exactly right. Whoever did this just documented their own tampering. The primary now shows a gap. The backup shows what filled that gap. The delta between the two is a confession. I thought about Raymond asleep in our bedroom, breathing steadily. I thought about him sitting at a terminal somewhere, his office maybe, or a laptop he kept somewhere I had never looked, and carefully deleting 11 entries believing he was erasing something. Instead, he had created a paper trail so clean it could survive a courtroom. Calvin, I said, print everything from the backup, every flagged entry, every hash verification record, every sync log. Print 2 copies. One for Patricia Owens, one for secure off-site storage, not the pharmacy, somewhere Raymond has never been. I'll have it ready by 6, he said. And the camera footage, the 43 days. Can you pull still frames from the 8 evenings with the highest activity? Already started, Calvin said. There's something you need to see in those frames. There's a woman. I stood up from the kitchen table. Describe her. Mid-30s, I'd estimate. Brown hair, shoulder length. She parks a dark blue sedan in the far corner of the lot, the spot that's technically outside our property line, which is probably intentional. She meets someone at the side entrance on 8 separate evenings over the past 6 weeks. They exchange a package small rectangular the size of a shoebox or smaller. The meetings are short, never more than 4 minutes. And the someone at the side entrance. Calvin was quiet for a moment. I can't confirm from the angle, but the build is consistent with Raymond. Same height, same posture, and the access log shows RC-04 active at the side entrance on 6 of those 8 evenings. I sat back down. The sedan, did you run the plate? Partial. 3 characters are clear on the best frame. I sent it to Frank an hour ago. He came back 20 minutes later. Calvin's voice shifted, not louder, but denser somehow, the way a person's voice gets when they are about to say something that changes the weight of a conversation. The vehicle is registered to Merit Medical Supply, LLC, incorporated in Georgia 14 months ago. The registered agent is a Dana Merritt. The name landed in my chest like something cold. Dana Merritt. I had not heard that name in 5 years. I had hoped, in the way you hope about things you would rather not think about, that I would never hear it again. You know her, Calvin said. It was not a question. I fired her, I said. 5 years ago, from the Pooler location. She was processing unauthorized refills on controlled prescriptions, not selling them as far as we could determine, but routing them in ways that didn't match any legitimate patient record. I gave her the choice between resignation and a formal DEA report. She resigned. I paused. She told me I was making a mistake, that she would remember it. There was a silence on the line that felt in the particular way silences sometimes do, like the space where something significant was being absorbed. She remembered it, Calvin said finally. She did. I looked at the blank page of my notebook. I picked up the pen and wrote 2 words at the top, Dana Merritt. Then beneath it, Merit Medical Supply, LLC. 14 months. Then 2 months before the wedding. Calvin, how long ago did you say the company was incorporated? 14 months. Our wedding was 16 months ago. Another silence. So she set it up 2 months before you married him, Calvin said quietly. Or Raymond set it up and put her name on it. Either way, I stopped, thought it through. Either way, this was not impulsive. This was built in advance. The pharmacy was always the target. I was always the mechanism. I sat with that for a moment. It is a particular kind of knowledge, the kind that does not surprise you exactly, because some part of you had already begun to understand it, but that still lands differently when it becomes a fact instead of a suspicion. Like the difference between knowing a storm is coming and feeling the first drop of rain. Send everything to Frank, I said. All the still frames, the plate, partial, the backup logs. Tell him I need whatever is publicly available on Dana Merritt business filings, prior addresses, any professional licenses, anything that puts her in the same orbit as Raymond before the company was incorporated. I'll send it in the next 30 minutes. Good. I stood up, moved to the kitchen window, looked out at the backyard. The Savannah night was dark and warm and entirely indifferent. Calvin, one more thing. When you were at the pharmacy tonight before you called me, did you notice anything else? Anything physical? A beat? Actually, yes. That's the other reason I called. His voice was careful now, deliberate. When I went out to check the camera in the parking lot, I found a scratch on your car. Driver's side rear panel, fresh. The kind of mark that doesn't happen in an empty lot at 2 a.m. by accident. I did not say anything. Someone was there tonight, Mrs. Caldwell, after hours, and they knew which car was yours. I looked at the kitchen window, at my own reflection in the dark glass, 57 years old, standing in my kitchen at 3 a.m, holding a phone and a pen, entirely awake. Then they also know, I said slowly, that I was there earlier tonight. Yes, Calvin said. I think that's the point. I thanked him, ended the call, and stood at the window for a long time after that. The chamomile tea had gone completely cold. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, the way Savannah gets quiet in the deepest part of the night, not silent, but settled, as if the city had decided, at least for these few hours, to hold still. I did not feel settled. I felt for the first time since this had begun that whatever was happening was no longer operating on a slow timeline. Someone had been in that parking lot tonight. Someone had left a mark on my car deliberately carefully to make sure I knew they had been there. And that meant the pace was about to change whether I was ready for it or not. Sunday morning at First Baptist Savannah smells like candle wax fresh flowers and the particular brand of cologne that older Southern men wear to church because they have worn it every Sunday for 40 years and see no reason to change. I had been coming to this building since I was 31 years old. I knew every face in every pew, knew which families sat where, and I knew which friendships were genuine and which ones were maintained out of obligation. Ruth Hanson found me before the service ended. She slipped into the aisle seat beside me during the final hymn close enough that our shoulders touched, and she leaned in without preamble. "I need to talk to you. Not here. After." "I know," I said. We waited until the congregation began to filter out until the noise of greetings and goodbyes filled the foyer and gave us cover. Ruth steered me toward the side garden, a quiet stretch of brick path behind the building, where nobody went unless they specifically wanted to be left alone. Ruth Hanson was 63 years old, small and sharp-eyed, with white hair she kept cropped close and hands that were never still when she was thinking. She had spent 20 years as a paralegal at one of Savannah's oldest law firms before her retirement, and she had never fully stopped being one. She noticed things. She cataloged them. She forgot nothing. "I haven't slept well since Tuesday," she said without easing into it. "What I heard in that hallway, Maggie, I've been turning it over and over, and I need to know. Is he hurting you?" I looked at her steadily. "Yes." She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then she opened them. "Tell me what you need." "I need a sworn statement," I said. "A written account of what you heard Raymond say to me in that courthouse hallway. Date, time, exact words as best you can recall the context. Signed and notarized." I paused. "Ruth, I won't ask you to do this if you're not certain about what you heard. I need you to be certain." "I am certain." Her voice did not waver. He said, and I am quoting this precisely, because I wrote it down the moment I got to my car. "Just a few more hours, sweetheart, and then I won't have to sit next to this anymore." I was 6 feet behind you on that bench. The acoustics in that hallway carry, I heard every syllable. He'll say you misheard, that it was taken out of context. Let him say it. Ruth straightened slightly, the paralegal in her surfacing through the friend. "I know what I heard. And I know the difference between a man venting frustration and a man who means what he says. That man meant it." She looked at me with something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but occupied the uncomfortable space between the two. "How long has this been going on?" "Long enough," I said. "The statement would go to my attorney and potentially to a prosecutor. You understand what that means?" "It means I may be called to testify." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. A mockingbird landed on the brick wall nearby and regarded us with one eye. Ruth watched it for a second, then looked back at me. "You know I'll do it. I just needed to hear you ask instead of dancing around it." She reached into her handbag and produced a small spiral notebook, the kind she had carried every day during her paralegal years, and apparently still did. "I already wrote it out. I just need Patricia Owen's address to send it to her directly." I stared at the notebook. "You already wrote it?" "Tuesday night. I told you I haven't been sleeping." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Give me Patricia's address and I'll have it notarized at the bank tomorrow morning and delivered to her office by noon." I gave her the address. We stood together in the side garden for a moment longer, the morning settling around us, the sounds of the congregation retreating toward the parking lot. Then Raymond appeared at the corner of the building. He saw us, and his face assembled itself into warmth with a speed that should have impressed me once. "There you are." He walked toward us with his hands relaxed at his sides. Sunday easy, as if the world were exactly the shape he wanted it to be. "Ruth, it's good to see you. How are you keeping? Very well, Raymond, Ruth said. Her voice was flawless, pleasant, unhurried, the tone of a woman exchanging pleasantries after church. Nothing in her face gave away a single thing. I had always admired her composure. I admired it considerably more right now. Maggie, we should get going if we want to beat the lunch crowd at Alligator Soul. Raymond touched my elbow, the gesture of a devoted husband. Unless you ladies need more time, We're finished, I said. I'll be right there. He smiled at Ruth once more, said something pleasant about the sermon, and walked back around the corner toward the parking lot. Ruth watched him go. When he was out of sight, she turned to me and said very quietly, "He has no idea, does he?" "None," I said. She pressed my hand once briefly and let go. "Good. Keep it that way." She tucked the notebook back into her handbag. "I'll have the statement to Patricia by noon tomorrow." I watched her walk away and then stood alone in the side garden for a moment before I followed Raymond to the car. On the drive home, he talked about the sermon, about lunch, about a trip he wanted to take in the fall. I answered at the right moments, asked a question when it seemed natural, and kept my expression easy and open. But in my coat pocket, my hand was closed around my phone, and there was a new text waiting from Frank Delano that I had not yet read. It had arrived during the service. It said, "Simmons, you need to see what I found. Call me when you're alone." Raymond left after lunch to play golf with someone from his office. He mentioned the name twice, casually, the way people do when they want you to remember it. I smiled and said to have a good time and watched his car pull out of the driveway from the kitchen window. Then I called Frank Delano. He answered before the second ring. "Are you alone?" "For the next 3 hours," I said. "Tell me about Simmons." "Not on the phone. Can you get to Patricia's office by 2?" I was already reaching for my keys. Patricia's office on Bull Street was closed on Sundays, which was exactly why Frank had chosen it. She met us at the side entrance, let us in through the back hallway, and led us to the conference room without turning on the front lights. Frank was already there, his legal pad open, a thick folder sitting in the center of the table. He did not waste time. Gerald Simmons. He is a licensed physician in the state of Georgia, internal medicine practicing out of a small private clinic in Pooler. Clean record on the surface, no disciplinary actions, no malpractice suits. But here's what's interesting. He opened the folder and slid a printed spreadsheet across the table toward me. Over the past 8 months, Dr. Simmons has authorized prescriptions through your pharmacy system, specifically through your Pooler location, for 23 patients. All of them Medicare beneficiaries, all of them with valid-looking ID numbers. I looked at the spreadsheet. 23 names, 23 Medicare numbers, 23 sets of prescription authorizations. I cross-referenced 17 of these names against the CMS enrollment database. Frank continued. CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, maintains a national registry of every enrolled Medicare beneficiary. 17 of these patients do not exist. The names are real enough common names, nothing unusual, but the Medicare ID numbers are either fabricated or belong to deceased beneficiaries whose records were never properly closed. Patricia leaned forward. Phantom billing. Classic phantom billing. Frank confirmed. Simmons authorizes prescriptions for patients who don't exist. Your pharmacy fills those prescriptions and bills Medicare for reimbursement. Medicare pays. The drugs that were supposedly dispensed to these ghost patients never actually went to any patient, they went somewhere else entirely. He paused and looked at me directly. Given what Calvin found in your shrink report, I think we both know where some of them went. I set the spreadsheet down carefully. The room was very quiet. Phantom billing was not a minor offense. Under federal law, specifically 18 U.S.C. Section 1347, the Healthcare Fraud Statute, billing a federal program like Medicare for services or medications never actually provided carries a sentence of up to 10 years in federal prison per count. 23 counts, 17 confirmed ghost patients. The mathematics of Raymond's desperation suddenly became very clear to me. He had not just been slowly poisoning me. He had been running a federal crime through my pharmacy while he did it, using my business infrastructure, my Medicare provider number, my reputation, everything I had built over 30 years, as the vehicle for his fraud. He needed cash flow. I said. The trust assets were locked. The guardianship would take time, but Medicare reimbursements process in 30 days. That's exactly right, Frank said. Dana Merritt's company, Merritt Medical Supply, is the distribution link. She sources the compounds, delivers them to the pharmacy through the back channel Calvin documented on the parking lot camera, and the paperwork shows them as legitimately dispensed to Simmons' ghost patients. Raymond coordinates the timing through his RC04 access. Simmons signs off on the authorizations. The money flows back through Merritt Medical Supply as consulting fees. Patricia was already writing. This could support a broader federal conspiracy case, possibly even RICO, if prosecutors can prove the pattern. 3 actors coordinated activity financial benefit flowing through a legitimate business entity used as a cover. I thought about the name of my pharmacy, Caldwell Family Pharmacy. 3 locations, 30 years my father's name, still on the original sign above the Broughton Street door. They used my father's pharmacy to run this, I said. Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. I picked up the folder and went through it page by page. Simmons' authorization records, the Medicare ID cross-references Frank had compiled, Dana Merritt's business registration showing Merritt Medical Supply Incorporated 14 months ago. The same month, Raymond had been added to my system as RC-04, 14 months ago, 2 months after we got married. He started planning this before the wedding, I said. The company incorporation date suggests the framework was in place before he proposed, Frank said, and let that sit. I put the folder down. I had been in this business long enough to know that every transaction leaves a trail. My father had told me that. What he had not told me, what I was learning now at 57 in a locked office on a Sunday afternoon, was that the trail works in every direction. It traps the careful and the careless alike. Raymond had been careful, but not careful enough. He had not known about the backup server. He had not known that Calvin would notice the camera. He had not known that Dana Merritt's partial plate would be visible from the loading dock angle. And he had not known that I had spent 30 years learning exactly how to read the kind of paper trail he had left behind. What do we do with this? Patricia asked. We don't take it to the police yet, I said. If Raymond finds out we have this before the trust protections are fully activated, he'll move faster than we can respond. We need the successor trustee clause to kick in first, and for that we need his guardianship petition to advance to formal hearing status. I looked at Frank. How long? At the pace his attorney is moving 2 weeks, maybe 3. Then we have 2 weeks to finish building what we have. I stood up and straightened my jacket. There's one more piece I need. The batch numbers on the compounds Simmons authorized, I want to trace them back to the original manufacturer. Every pharmaceutical lot has a chain of custody from the moment it leaves the production facility. If we can show that the batch numbers in our system were pulled from a hospice distribution network and never meant for general pharmacy use, that closes the last gap in the chain. Frank made a note. I'll pull the lot traceability records tomorrow. I picked up my purse and looked at both of them. 2 weeks, I said. Don't move on anything until I say so. I walked out into the Sunday afternoon and drove home to the man who thought he was winning. He had no idea that his own paper trail was already 3 steps ahead of him. Frank called me Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly contracts at my desk. Raymond had already left for whatever it was he did on Tuesday mornings. He had stopped explaining his schedule to me in any detail months ago, and I had stopped asking. The distance between us had become so practiced that it barely registered as distance anymore. It just felt like the shape of our marriage. I met with Darnell Webb last night, Frank said. I think you need to hear this directly. Can you talk? Go ahead, I said and closed the contract folder. Frank had located Darnell Webb through the delivery records Calvin had pulled from the pharmacy's courier log, a standard medical courier who had been contracted by Caldwell Pharmacy for routine prescription deliveries for the past 2 years. Frank had approached him, carefully identified himself as a private investigator working on behalf of the pharmacy ownership, and asked if Darnell would be willing to meet informally. Darnell had agreed, though Frank said he had spent the first 10 minutes of the conversation looking at the exits. He's scared, Frank told me, not of us, of what he got himself into. What did he say? He said that over the past 6 months, he received 4 separate delivery assignments that didn't go through the normal dispatch system. Instead of coming through the pharmacy's scheduling software, these jobs came directly to his personal cell phone. Text messages from a number he didn't recognize. The instructions were specific: pick up a package from a woman at the rear parking lot of your Broughton Street location. Deliver it to an address in Pooler. No scan, no system entry. Cash payment on delivery. I set my pen down. No scan meant no entry into the pharmacy's dispensing system. No record of the transaction. For a controlled substance, that was not a clerical shortcut. That was a federal violation. He did it, I said. It was not a question. He did it, Frank confirmed. First time, he said he told himself it was probably just a scheduling glitch, that the system had a bug, and they were working around it temporarily. Second time, he asked the woman about it. She told him Mrs. Caldwell had approved an expedited delivery protocol for certain sensitive medications and that the paperwork would be filed separately. He accepted that. And he believed it because my name was on it. Yes. Frank paused. Third time, he noticed the package felt different from a standard pharmacy bag. Heavier. He didn't open it, but when it slipped from his hands, loading it into his car, one corner tore, and he saw the label. Batch number, compound name, and a distribution code he didn't recognize. He said it didn't look like anything he'd delivered before, so he did something smart. He photographed it. Still on his old phone, never deleted. I have a copy. Frank's voice carried the particular quality of a man who has just confirmed something he was hoping to confirm. The batch number on that label matches the lot numbers Calvin flagged in your shrink report. Same compound, same distribution series. I stood up from my desk and walked to the window. Outside Broughton Street moved at its usual Tuesday pace tourist delivery trucks, a couple walking a dog. The ordinary surface of a city that had no idea what was happening inside this building. You said I said. The woman in the parking lot, he described her. Mid-30s brown hair, drove a dark blue sedan. On the 4th delivery, she wasn't alone. There was a man with her at the side entrance, not in the lot, but at the gate. Darnell said he'd seen the man before once at a restaurant on River Street with you. He described him clearly enough. Raymond, at the side entrance of my own pharmacy, receiving packages from Dana Merritt, while I sat somewhere inside believing he was helping me manage operations. Does Darnell understand what he's looking at? I asked. He understands enough to be frightened, Frank said. I explained to him that what he participated in, even without full knowledge, could expose him to charges as an unwitting participant in a controlled substance distribution scheme. But I also told him that full voluntary cooperation with a federal investigation, including a formal witness statement, typically results in prosecutorial discretion. In plain language, if he comes forward now and tells everything, there is a strong argument for immunity. Will he? He's thinking about it. He has a daughter, 7 years old. He kept mentioning her. Frank paused. I think he'll do the right thing. He just needs a day to get there. I thought about a man who carried packages he did not fully understand for money he needed badly enough not to ask the questions he should have asked. I knew something about not asking questions when the answers were too inconvenient to hear. Tell him he's not the target, I said. Tell him from me personally, I don't want the man who carried the packages. I want the people who loaded them. I'll tell him. A brief silence. There's one more thing. I pulled the parking lot footage again with Calvin this morning and isolated the clearest frame of Dana in the lot. We ran it against the DMV photo on her driver's license. It's a match clean enough to hold up. And the third time she appears on camera, there's a second vehicle in the lot, parked just out of frame, but the front bumper is visible. Frank paused. The partial plate matches Raymond's car, Mrs. Caldwell. I pressed my hand flat against the window glass. Raymond's car in my parking lot. Dana Merritt and my husband together behind my building after hours exchanging packages of compounds that were ending up in my morning medications. I had handed him the keys to this building. I had signed his access into my system. I had married him in a church full of people who wished us well. Frank, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. I need you to find out who Stuart Briggs met with in the 2 weeks before the first anomalous log entry. Because whoever Raymond used to get inside that warehouse after hours, it wasn't Dana Merritt carrying boxes through the front door alone. There was a short silence on the other end. "Stuart Briggs," Frank said slowly, "your warehouse manager. He's been with me 12 years, I said, which means if Raymond got to him, he didn't do it with money. He did it with something else." Frank found out what Raymond had used on Stuart Briggs in less than 48 hours. It was not a threat against Stuart's family. It was not blackmail in the conventional sense. It was something quieter, and in its own way, more devastating a mistake Stuart had made 4 years ago, during a period when his wife was sick and the medical bills were outrunning his salary, when he had processed a return of expired controlled substances without following the full DEA disposal protocol. Not theft, not fraud, just a paperwork shortcut taken by a tired man trying to keep too many plates spinning at once. Raymond had found it. How he had found it, Frank did not yet know. But he had found it, and he had held it over Stuart Briggs like a blade. We went to Stuart's house on a Wednesday evening, Frank and I, without calling ahead. His neighborhood was the kind of quiet Savannah residential street where people sat on their porches in the early evening and knew each other's cars. When I pulled up, I saw Stuart's wife through the front window moving in the kitchen. I stayed in the car while Frank knocked. Stuart answered the door. He looked at Frank first, then passed him at me, and every bit of color left his face. Frank said, "We're not here to cause you trouble, Stuart. We're here because we think you've been carrying something you shouldn't have to carry alone." Stuart held the door open for a long moment, then stepped back and let us in. His living room was modest and clean, a couch, a television, a child's drawing framed on the wall that said, "World's Best Dad" in uneven crayon letters. Stuart sat in the armchair across from Frank and me, his hands pressed together between his knees, and he looked like a man who had been waiting for this conversation for months and was not sure whether its arrival was a relief or the end of everything. "I knew you'd come eventually," he said. "I just didn't know if it would be you or the police." "Tell us what happened," I said, "from the beginning." He was quiet for a moment. Then he started talking. 5 months ago, Raymond had come to Stuart privately without warning on a Tuesday evening after the staff had gone home. He had brought a folder. Inside was a copy of the DEA disposal form from 4 years ago, the one with the missing signatures, the incorrect lot numbers, the disposal record that did not match the pickup manifest. Alone, it was ambiguous. With the right framing, Stuart said Raymond had explained calmly it could look like deliberate diversion of controlled substances, a federal offense, enough to end his career, cost him his license, and potentially send him to prison. He didn't shout, Stuart said, and there was something haunted in the way he said it. That was the worst part. He just sat down and laid it out like he was going over a business proposal. He said all he needed was for me to approve certain after-hours inventory entries and not ask questions about the batch numbers. He said it would be temporary. He said nobody would get hurt. "Did you believe him?" Frank asked. Stuart looked down at his hands. "I believed I didn't have a choice." I leaned forward. "Stuart, how many entries did you approve?" 11, he said. "Over 3 months. I approved the release documentation for 11 inventory withdrawals that I knew were not going to legitimate patients. I signed the electronic forms because Raymond stood behind me while I did it." He stopped, swallowed. "Mrs. Caldwell, I have worked for your family for 12 years. Your father hired me. I know what this business means, and His voice cracked slightly, and he pressed his hands together harder. "I didn't know what was in those compounds. I didn't know what he was doing with them. I swear to God, I didn't know he was giving them to you." The room was very still. I looked at this man, a man who had been at my father's retirement party, who had trained half the warehouse staff currently working for me, who had a child's drawing on his wall that said, "World's Best Dad and I made a decision about what kind of person I was going to be in the middle of all of this." "I believe you," I said. He looked up. His eyes were red at the corners. "But I need something from you," I continued. "I need everything you kept, every document, every copy, every record you held on to, because some part of you knew you might need it one day. Whatever you have, I need it tonight." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he disappeared into the hallway, and came back carrying a manila envelope that was thick enough to have taken real effort to compile. He held it out with both hands the way you hand someone something that has been too heavy to carry for too long. 11 withdrawal forms, he said. Printed copies with the electronic timestamps and the batch numbers. I printed them the night after Raymond first approached me. I hid them here because I was too afraid to take them to anyone and too afraid to destroy them. He met my eyes. I kept them because I needed to know that if it all fell apart, there would be something that showed I wasn't the one who started it. Frank took the envelope and opened it. He went through the first 3 pages, checking dates and batch numbers against the list on his legal pad. After a moment, he looked at me. "These match the backup server logs exactly," he said. I stood up and extended my hand to Stuart. He shook it, and I could feel the tension going out of his grip the moment our hands met. "You're going to need to give a formal statement," I told him, "to my attorney and eventually to a prosecutor. It won't be comfortable. Raymond will try to use that DEA disposal form against you the moment he realizes you've come forward." "I know," Stuart said, "but I will make sure the full context of what happened to you is part of every document we file. You were coerced. That matters under the law, and I will make certain it is heard." He nodded. His wife appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, looking at us with the particular expression of a woman who has watched her husband carry something invisible and terrible for months and is only now beginning to understand what it was. Outside in the car, Frank held the envelope on his lap and said nothing for a moment. Then he turned to me. "There's something else I need to tell you," he said. "While we were inside, I got a message from Calvin. Someone attempted remote access to the backup server tonight. Different IP address than the last attempt. And Mrs. Caldwell—" He paused. "This one traced to a hotel 2 blocks from Patricia's office." I looked at him steadily. "Raymond knows we're building something." "He knows," Frank said, "which means we're running out of time to do this quietly." Patricia called at 6:14 in the morning, and I knew from the first syllable that something had broken overnight. "He filed last night," she said. "Emergency guardianship petition, 9:47 p.m. I've been up since midnight." I stepped into the hallway and pulled the bedroom door nearly shut behind me. Raymond was still asleep. I could hear him breathing. What grounds did he use? Imminent risk to personal welfare. Simmons wrote a second letter more specific this time. Disorientation memory, lapses, impaired judgment in financial decisions. And Raymond filed a personal declaration stating that you've been making major pharmacy decisions without consulting him. Her voice tightened. He called it evidence of deteriorating capacity, Maggie. He used your competence against you. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes for exactly 3 seconds. How long do we have? 72 hours before the court can appoint a temporary guardian without our counter evidence on record. I need you at my office by 7. I'll be there at 6:45. I dressed in the dark, took nothing from the bathroom cabinet, and left without making coffee. Raymond did not stir. I sat in my car in the driveway for a moment and looked at the front of the house I had owned since 2003, the house that had my name on the deed and his presence in every room. And I thought about how quietly a person can be erased from their own life if they are not paying attention. I had been paying attention. I put the car in reverse and drove. Frank was already at Patricia's office when I arrived. He had his legal pad, his folder, and the particular expression he wore when things were moving faster than planned, but not faster than he could handle. Patricia spoke first. The successor trustee clause activated automatically the moment Raymond's petition was stamped by the court clerk last night. Meridian Fiduciary Group is now the acting trustee on the Caldwell Family Trust. Raymond has no authority over any trust asset as of 9:47 p.m. yesterday. I looked at her. He doesn't know that yet. He will the moment he tries to access anything. She held my gaze. I also activated your advance healthcare directive this morning. I am now your designated healthcare decision maker at every hospital and every pharmacy location. Raymond's name has been removed from every authorized contact list. Frank leaned forward. Calvin is standing by to revoke RC04. Say the word. I said it. Do it now. Frank typed a message on his phone. 30 seconds later, it buzzed with a reply. He looked up. RC04 is deactivated across all 3 locations as of 6:22 a.m. The 3 of us sat with that for a moment. Then Patricia opened her folder and slid a document across the table. This is what we file as our response to the emergency petition. Not just in opposition, the full picture. Shrink report backup server logs, CCTV footage, Darnell Webb statement, Stewart's 11 withdrawal forms the ghost patient trail, the batch number records. Everything we have organized and submitted today. He'll say I fabricated it, I said. Let him say it. Patricia's voice was even and absolutely certain. The backup server has hash verification that proves the data was never altered. Darnell Webb has no reason to lie. Stuart Briggs has 12 years of clean service behind him. Raymond cannot build a counter-narrative strong enough to bury all of that at once. He would need time, and we are not giving him time. Frank was quiet during this exchange, watching me. When Patricia finished, he spoke. There's something I need to say that neither of you is going to like. Patricia and I both looked at him. Raymond is not stupid, Frank said. He filed last night because he felt the ground shifting. The IP attempt on the backup server, the scratch on Maggie's car, those weren't accidents. He knows something is closing in. And a man who knows that and still files an emergency petition in the middle of the night is not a man who thinks he's losing. He paused. He's a man who thinks he has one more move we haven't seen yet. The room was quiet. What kind of move did I asked? That's what I don't know yet. Frank tapped his pen against the legal pad. But I know this, it won't come through the courts anymore. Whatever he does next, it'll be something that doesn't leave a paper trail, something faster and messier than a petition. I thought about Raymond's hands, how warm they always were, how he had held mine at that courthouse like a man who meant it. He'll go after someone close to me, I said, not a question, a recognition. Frank nodded slowly. He needs a weak point, someone he can pressure, threaten, or turn. Someone whose cooperation would unravel what we've built. He looked at me carefully. Who in your circle is the most exposed right now? I thought about Darnell Webb and his 7-year-old daughter. I thought about Stuart Briggs sitting in his armchair with red-rimmed eyes. I thought about Helen Marsh, my head pharmacist, who had been watching Raymond move through that building for months and had never said a word to me about it. Helen. Something shifted in my chest. Helen Marsh. I said quietly. She's seen more than she's told me. I've known it for weeks, and I haven't pushed her because I didn't want to frighten her. I looked at Frank. If Raymond knows she's been keeping something back, then she's already in his sights, Frank finished. Patricia stood up. I'll file the response this morning. Frank, I need you on Helen today. She looked at me. And Maggie, when Raymond wakes up and finds RC04 dead and the trust locked and his petition answered, he is going to call you. And when he does, I need you to answer like nothing has changed. I nodded. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from Raymond sent 30 seconds ago. Morning, sweetheart. You left early. Everything okay? I picked up the phone and typed back, couldn't sleep, went to check on the Broughton Street inventory. Be home by noon. Love you. I set the phone face down on the table. Patricia and Frank were both watching me. He'll believe it, I said. He always has. Before I tell you what that report said, and trust me, the number on that page changed everything I need to know, you are still with me. Drop the number 11 in the comments right now. That is all. Just 11. It tells me you have made it this far, and it means more to me than you know. A small note before we continue. Some details in the story ahead have been reconstructed to carry the message as clearly as possible. Not everything happened in exactly this way. If that is not what you are looking for, that is completely fine. You are welcome to step away here. But if you choose to stay, I promise what comes next will be worth it. I had made the appointment with Dr. William Farber 3 weeks earlier from a prepaid phone I bought at a CVS on Abercorn Street and paid for in cash. Raymond did not know the number. Raymond did not know the name. Raymond did not know that on the morning he woke up to find his RC04 access dead and his emergency petition answered. I was already 90 miles away on E16, heading toward Augusta. Frank followed at a distance he described as close enough to matter, far enough not to spook anyone. He had insisted, and I had not argued. Dr. William Farber ran a neurology practice out of a quiet office building near Augusta University Medical Center. He was 61 years old with the deliberate manner of a man who had spent 4 decades listening carefully before he spoke. Patricia had found him through a colleague, someone entirely outside Savannah's medical community, someone Raymond had never met and could not have reached. His receptionist showed me to an examination room, and Dr. Farber came in. 5 minutes later, shook my hand and sat across from me without ceremony. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, "you brought the samples." I opened my purse and placed 3 sealed plastic bags on the examination table between us. Each one contained a single supplement capsule, dated and initialed in my handwriting, on the outside of the bag. I removed these from my morning medications on 3 separate mornings over the past 2 weeks, I said. Instead of swallowing them, I palmed them and sealed them immediately. I have not opened the bags. He picked up each one and examined it carefully. "And these are what your husband prepares for you each morning." "Yes." "Have you had blood work done recently?" "Not through my regular physician. I had an independent draw done 10 days ago at a private lab in Charleston that has no relationship with any provider my husband has contact with. The results came back 4 days ago." I pulled the lab report from my purse and handed it to him. Dr. Farber read it without rushing. His expression did not change dramatically, but something behind his eyes shifted, a sharpening, a settling into professional seriousness that told me the numbers meant something to him. "This compound," he said, pointing to a line on the report, "at this concentration taken daily over a sustained period, you'd experience exactly what you described when you called my office. Fatigue, cognitive slowing, postural dizziness. Nothing dramatic enough to send you to an emergency room. Just enough to make a 57-year-old woman seem like she was aging faster than she should." He set the report down, and to anyone who didn't know what they were looking for, it would read as natural decline, which is exactly what my husband's physician put in writing, I said. Dr. Farber looked at me steadily. "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm going to conduct a full neurological evaluation today. Cognitive testing, reflex, assessment coordination, memory, recall. And I'm going to send those capsules to a certified forensic toxicology lab with whom I have a standing professional relationship. Results will take 5 to 7 days." He paused. "If what I think is in those capsules is confirmed, my report will state clearly that your symptoms are chemically induced, not age-related, and that your cognitive capacity is fully intact. That report will carry my signature, my license number, and my willingness to testify to its contents in any legal proceeding where it is needed." "That's exactly what I need," I said. The evaluation took 90 minutes. Dr. Farber asked me to recall sequences of numbers, identify patterns, trace figures with my eyes, answer questions about current events, explain the process by which a pharmacy tracks controlled substance inventory from order to dispensing. That last one he had not planned. He asked it spontaneously, I suspected, to see how I handled a complex procedural question under mild pressure. I answered it in 4 minutes without pausing once. When it was over, he sat back and looked at me with something that was not quite a smile but carried warmth in it. "Your cognitive function is entirely normal for your age, above average in several categories if you want the specifics." He closed his folder. "Whatever is in those capsules, Mrs. Caldwell, it has not touched your mind. It has only touched your body." I sat in the parking lot of his office building for a long time after that. Not crying. I had made a decision early on that I would not spend tears on Raymond Caldwell, not because I did not feel the weight of what he had done, but because tears required time, and I did not have time to spare. I called Patricia from the road. "Farber confirmed it," I said. "Chemically induced symptoms. Cognitive function fully intact. He's sending the capsules to forensic toxicology. Results in a week." "That's the medical counter we needed," she said immediately. Simmons' letter is neutralized the moment Farber's report hits the record. A brief silence. How are you? It was such a simple question. Patricia Owens, who had known me for 21 years and almost never asked it. I'm angry, I said honestly. I've been managing it, but I'm angry. Good, she said quietly. Stay angry. It's keeping you sharp. I drove home and arrived to find Raymond in the kitchen making dinner. The whole house smelled of rosemary chicken. My favorite, a fact he had cataloged sometime in the first year of our marriage and deployed with precision ever since. He turned when I came in, and his face arranged itself into relief and warmth. There you are, he said. I was starting to worry. Long day. Very, I said, setting my purse on the counter, the purse that no longer contained 3 plastic bags. Sit down. He pulled out a chair for me with the ease of a man who believed completely that he was still in control of this house, this marriage, this situation. I'll bring you a plate. I sat. I watched him move around my kitchen. I thought about what Frank had said, that Raymond's next move would not come through the courts. And then my phone buzzed with a message from Frank. 4 words. Helen called me tonight. The restaurant Frank chose was a small Italian place on Waters Avenue, the kind of spot with mismatched chairs and handwritten specials on a chalkboard, busy enough on a weeknight that 2 people talking quietly in a corner booth would not draw a second glance. I arrived 10 minutes before Frank and Helen and took a table 2 booths away, close enough that the small wireless receiver in my right ear could pick up the mic clipped inside Frank's jacket lapel. I ordered soup I did not intend to eat and kept my eyes on the menu. Helen Marsh had been my head pharmacist for 15 years. She knew every protocol, every audit procedure, every DEA compliance requirement I had ever implemented. She was 53 years old, precise and steady, the kind of person who noticed when something was wrong, but sometimes waited too long to say so. I had known for weeks that she was carrying something. I had not pushed her because I was afraid that pushing would send her in the wrong direction. Frank had simply asked, and she had called him the same evening. They came in together. Frank had met her in the parking lot and walked her in, which told me he had assessed her anxiety level and decided she needed that small gesture of steadiness. They settled into the corner booth. I heard the soft sound of Frank's mic adjusting as he sat. Helen's voice came through the earpiece, low and tightly controlled. I don't know where to start. Start with the first time something felt wrong, Frank said. A pause. Dana Merritt. About 2 months ago, she came to the Broughton Street location on a Tuesday afternoon, not the warehouse entrance, the staff entrance. She said she was there for a supplier meeting with Raymond. I didn't question it. Raymond had been coming and going freely for months by then. Helen stopped. But then she came to find me specifically. She said Mrs. Caldwell had approved a new expedited dispensing protocol for certain specialty compounds, and that some of the authorizations would come directly from her office rather than through the standard physician order channel. What did you say? Frank asked. I said I needed to see documentation from Mrs. Caldwell directly. Helen's voice hardened slightly at the memory. Dana said it was being handled at the ownership level and that I should trust the process. Those were her exact words. Trust the process. A bitter pause. I didn't approve anything, but I also didn't pick up the phone and call you Mrs. Caldwell, and that is something I have to live with. I stared at the soup in front of me. Frank said, Did Dana contact you again after that? Twice, both times by email. The first email asked me to approve a batch release for a compound. I didn't recognize it referenced a physician authorization code I couldn't verify in our system. I didn't respond. The second email came 3 days later, and it was... Helen paused. It was friendlier. That's what frightened me more than if she'd been aggressive. She wrote like we were colleagues working out a routine matter, like what she was asking was completely normal. Do you still have the emails? I never deleted them. I was afraid to delete them and afraid to forward them to anyone. I printed them both and kept them at home. Her voice dropped further. I was afraid of Raymond. I need you to understand that. He came to me separately maybe 3 weeks after Dana's first visit. He sat down in my office, and he was perfectly pleasant, perfectly calm, and he told me that Mrs. Caldwell's health was declining more seriously than people realized, that decisions were being made at the family level to manage the business through a transition period, and that the most professional thing I could do was to continue doing my job without asking questions that weren't mine to ask. Frank said, "How did you take that?" "I took it as a threat dressed in a suit." Helen's voice was flat and certain. "I've worked for Maggie Caldwell for 15 years. I know how she runs this business. She does not make decisions through intermediaries, and she does not manage transitions through silence." The moment Raymond said those words, I knew something was deeply wrong. She stopped. "You didn't know who to trust," Frank said quietly. "I didn't know if I could trust anyone in that building. I didn't know how far it went." A long pause. "Is she all right, Mrs. Caldwell? Is she actually all right?" I pressed my hand flat on the table under the edge of the cloth. Frank said, "She's sharp as she's ever been. She's the one who brought me in." A sound from Helen that was not quite a laugh and not quite a cry. Something between the two compressed and released in a single breath. "Of course she did." Frank gave her a moment, then continued. "Helen, I need those 2 emails, and I need a formal written statement of everything you've just told me. Dana's visits, Raymond's conversation in your office, the specific language he used, all of it." "I'll bring the printed emails tomorrow morning," Helen said, "and I'll write the statement tonight. I should have done it weeks ago." "You're doing it now," Frank said. "That's what matters." They were quiet for a moment. Then Helen said something that made me set down my spoon. "There's one more thing. Last Thursday evening, I was walking to my car, and I heard Dana on the phone in the far corner of the parking lot. She didn't see me. I stopped and I listened, because something in her tone, she sounded frightened. Not of us, of Raymond." Helen paused carefully. She said, and I remember this clearly, "He told me we'd split everything. Now he's talking about restructuring the arrangement. I'm not going to be the one who takes the fall for this." The restaurant noise continued around me, ordinary and indifferent. I reached for my phone and typed a single message to Frank, knowing it would buzz silently in his pocket. "She's breaking away from him. We need to move before he realizes it." Frank found Dana Merritt at a bar on Congress Street on a Thursday evening, sitting alone at the far end of the counter with a glass of white wine she had been nursing long enough that the condensation had pooled into a ring on the wood beneath it. He called me afterward just after 10, and I sat at the kitchen table with Raymond asleep down the hall and listened to every word. "She looked like someone who hadn't slept in a week," Frank said. I sat down 2 stools away and ordered a coffee. She glanced at me and then looked away. I gave it 5 minutes. Then I said her name. "How did she react?" She went very still, the way people go still when they've been waiting for something bad and it finally arrives. He paused. "I told her I was working on behalf of Caldwell Pharmacy and that I knew about Merritt Medical Supply, the batch deliveries, and the Tuesday evening arrangements in the rear parking lot. I told her I wasn't there to arrest her because I'm not a cop, but that the people I was working with were building a federal case, and that the question she needed to answer for herself was whether she wanted to be inside that case or outside it." What did she say? Nothing for about 30 seconds. Then she picked up her wine, finished it, set the glass down, and said, "He told me it was a short-term arrangement. He said nobody would get hurt." I pressed my hand against the edge of the kitchen table. "I've heard that before," I said quietly. Stuart said almost the same thing. "Raymond uses the same script," Frank said. "It's efficient. It tells you something about how many times he's done this kind of thing, or at least how carefully he planned it." He continued. "I asked her how the arrangement worked from her end. She said Raymond came to her 8 months before they approached your pharmacy system. He knew about her history with you, the termination, the circumstances, and he presented the scheme as a business opportunity. She would supply the compounds through Merritt Medical Supply, handle the distribution logistics, and take 40% of the Medicare reimbursements that flowed back through her company as consulting fees. And the other 60% went to Raymond. Through a shell account he controls offshore. Yes." A pause. "She also confirmed what we suspected about the compound. She sourced it specifically because of its pharmacological profile, slow accumulation symptoms, indistinguishable from natural aging, rapid metabolic clearance that makes it difficult to detect in a standard panel. She knew exactly what it was being used for Maggie. She knew from the beginning. The kitchen was very quiet. "She told you all of this voluntarily?" I asked. Once she started talking, she didn't stop. Frank's voice was measured. "Because here's what changed. 3 weeks ago, Raymond sent her an email, which she still has, suggesting that if the scheme came under scrutiny, the liability would rest primarily with the distribution company, with Merit Medical Supply, with her. He framed it as legal advice. She read it as him building the architecture to throw her under the bus. So she kept everything. 14 text messages and 3 emails between her and Raymond spanning 8 months. Dates, amounts, compound names, delivery schedules. She copied them all to a private account the night she received that email." Frank paused. "She called it her insurance. I told her insurance only works if you use it before the building burns down." "Is she willing to cooperate formally?" "She wants a deal first. Immunity on the distribution charges in exchange for full cooperation testimony, documents, everything. She understands she's still exposed on the Medicare fraud, but she's willing to accept reduced charges if she comes in now rather than being brought in later." "That's Patricia's territory," I said. "Can you get Dana into Patricia's office tomorrow?" "She agreed to that before I left the bar." Another pause. "There's one more thing. While I was sitting with Dana, my phone got a message from Calvin. Someone attempted remote access to the backup server again tonight. Different method this time, not a direct deletion attempt. They tried to install a script that would corrupt the hash verification files. If it had worked, it would have made the backup data legally unusable as evidence, because the chain of custody verification would have failed. I felt the coldness of that settle over me. Did it work? Calvin caught it in real time and isolated the intrusion before it reached the hash files. Everything is intact. Frank's voice hardened slightly. "But Maggie, this attempt was more sophisticated than the last one. Whoever is doing this understands exactly what the hash verification does and why destroying it would damage our case. This isn't Raymond fumbling around on a laptop. He's brought in someone who knows what they're doing. Or Dana knows what she's doing," I said, "and she hasn't fully committed to switching sides yet." Frank was quiet for a moment. "That occurred to me too. Which is why I need you to let Patricia handle the cooperation agreement tomorrow, and I need Calvin to add a second layer of protection to the backup server tonight that I'm not going to describe out loud on an open phone line." "Agreed," I said. I heard Raymond shift in the bedroom down the hall, a creak of the mattress, then silence. "Frank," I said, keeping my voice low, "how close are we?" "Close enough that Raymond can feel it," he said. "And that makes him the most dangerous he's ever been." A pause. "Get some sleep, Maggie. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." I ended the call and sat alone in my kitchen in the dark. Raymond had found someone technically sophisticated enough to attack a hash verification system. That meant he was spending money he did not have on people he could not fully trust, which meant he was frightened enough to take risks he would not have taken a month ago. Frightened men make mistakes. I was counting on that. Lawrence Gaines arrived at Patricia's office at 8:30 in the morning carrying a leather briefcase and the expression of a man who had read everything Frank sent him overnight and had not particularly enjoyed what he found. He was 50 years old, compact and deliberate, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of eyes that moved around a room once when he entered and then settled with complete stillness. Patricia had dealt with his office before. She had told me on the phone that morning before I left the house, Gaines is the kind of prosecutor who doesn't take a case unless he intends to finish it. If he's here, he thinks we have enough. I had arrived before him. I was on my second cup of coffee and feeling none of it. Gaines set his briefcase on the conference table, sat down without being asked, and looked at me directly. "Mrs. Caldwell, I've reviewed what Mr. Delano submitted last night. Before we go any further, I want to hear it from you. In your own words. What do you believe has been done to you and by whom?" I told him, plainly without embellishment, starting with the trembling hands in front of the bathroom mirror and ending with a hash verification attack on a backup server 2 nights ago. I spoke for 11 minutes without stopping. When I finished, Gaines had not written a single note. He had simply listened. "The forensic toxicology results from Dr. Farber's lab," he said. "When do you expect those—" "3 more days," I said, "possibly 2. He nodded. "When they come in, I want them sent directly to my office, not filed with a civil proceeding." He turned to Patricia. "You understand that once I open a federal investigation discovery timelines and evidence handling shift to DOJ jurisdiction, you lose some of the scheduling control you currently have." "I understand," Patricia said. "But Raymond Caldwell filed a supplemental declaration with the probate court yesterday evening. He named Stuart Briggs as the primary responsible party for the inventory irregularities. He attached a supporting statement from Gerald Simmons characterizing the discrepancies as the result of employee misconduct rather than any authorized direction from Mr. Caldwell." Gaines was quiet for a moment. "He's building a scapegoat." "He's building a scapegoat," Patricia confirmed. "And if we don't move on this now, Stuart Briggs could face a DEA investigation based on Raymond's declaration before our counter-evidence reaches the record." Frank had been sitting quietly at the end of the table. He spoke now. "Stuart kept copies of every document Raymond pressured him to sign. He's willing to give a full statement. He was coerced. Raymond used a prior procedural error as leverage. That's duress, not complicity." Gaines looked at me. "Mrs. Caldwell, to proceed formally, I need your authorization. Once I file, this becomes a federal matter. You accept that—" I looked at the folder on the table in front of me. Inside it was Stuart Briggs' manila envelope, 11 withdrawal forms, printed with timestamps and batch numbers compiled by a man who had been too frightened to come forward and too honest to destroy the evidence. Beside it was Helen Marsh's written statement. Beside that, the sworn declaration from Ruth Hansen about what she had heard in that courthouse hallway. These were not abstract documents. They were the accumulated weight of people who had been put in impossible positions by one man's greed and who had each chosen in their own time and their own way to do the harder thing. I picked up the manila envelope and held it for a moment. Then I looked at Gaines. "Mr. Gaines, Stuart Briggs, has worked for my family for 12 years. My father knew him. He made a mistake under direct coercion, and he preserved evidence at personal risk when he could have destroyed it. I will not allow him to carry Raymond's crimes on his record." I set the envelope on the table and slid it across to him. "File everything together. Stuart's statement goes in as a cooperating witness, not a subject. That is a condition of my authorization." Gaines looked at the envelope, then at me. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, exactly, but the particular respect one professional extends to another when they recognize a decision made from principle rather than strategy. "Agreed," he said. He picked up the envelope. "I'll have my office prepare the formal opening documents today. Mr. Delano, I'll need the digital evidence package transferred to our forensic unit under proper chain of custody protocols this afternoon." "Already prepared," Frank said. Gaines picked up his briefcase and paused at the door. "One thing, Mrs. Caldwell. Raymond Caldwell is going to know within 48 hours that a federal investigation has opened. Men in his position with his level of debt and his level of exposure tend to make one of 2 choices at that point. They lawyer up and go quiet, or they escalate." He held my gaze. "In my experience, the ones who have been running a scheme this long and this carefully don't go quiet easily." "I know," I said. He left. The 3 of us sat in the conference room without speaking for a moment. Then Patricia's phone rang. She answered, listened for 10 seconds, and set it down slowly. "That was the FBI field office in Atlanta," she said. "Dana Merritt walked in this morning without an attorney and asked to speak to a federal agent about a pharmacy fraud case in Savannah." She looked at me. "She didn't wait for us to arrange it. She went on her own." Frank and I looked at each other. "She's protecting herself," Frank said. "Or she's more frightened of Raymond than she is of the federal government," I said. "Which tells us something about what he may have said to her recently." I stood up. Patricia, get to Atlanta and get in that room before she says something that hurts our case. Frank, already moving, he said, and was out the door before I finished the sentence. I stood alone in the conference room looking at the empty table where 11 withdrawal forms and 3 statements and 4 months of careful quiet work had been handed to the people who could do something with it. The weight I had been carrying since July felt different now. Not lighter, just distributed differently across more hands moving in the same direction. That would have to be enough. Frank called me at noon from the parking lot of the FBI field office on Peachtree Street in Atlanta, and I could tell from the first 3 words, "She talked Maggie," that the morning had gone better than either of us had dared to plan for. I was sitting in my car outside the Broughton Street Pharmacy having told Raymond at breakfast that I had inventory reviews all day. He had kissed my cheek and said to take it easy. His hands had been warm. They were always warm. "Tell me everything," I said. Patricia got there 40 minutes after Dana walked in. Dana had already been in a conference room with Special Agent Rebecca Torres for 20 minutes. By then, Torres is their Medicare fraud specialist. She knows this type of case inside out. When Patricia arrived and identified herself as counsel, Torres paused the conversation and gave Dana 10 minutes to consult privately. Frank paused. Dana told Patricia she didn't want a lawyer. Patricia told her that was the single most dangerous sentence she had said all morning, and that she was going to sit in that room whether Dana wanted her there or not. I almost smiled. Good. Dana accepted it eventually. Torres came back in, and they worked out a proffer agreement on the spot. Frank explained without being asked. A proffer agreement means Dana can speak freely to the FBI without her words being used directly against her in court, as long as she tells the complete truth. If she lies, the agreement is void, and everything she says can be used against her. It's essentially a test drive for a full cooperation deal. And she agreed to that. She signed it and then talked for 2 hours straight. Frank's voice carried the particular quality of someone who has just watched a wall come down. She confirmed everything: the compound sourcing, the delivery schedule, the Tuesday evening parking lot, exchanges, the ghost patient billing structure, the split arrangement with Raymond, and the email where he tried to shift liability onto her. She handed over her phone so Torres could image it directly, all 14 text messages, and 3 emails pulled straight from the device. No chain of custody questions, no authentication issues. It's clean evidence. What did she say about the compound specifically? She confirmed the batch origin. The phenobarbital derivative was pulled from a hospice distribution network in Tennessee. Merit Medical Supply had a legitimate supply contract with a hospice operator, and Dana diverted specific lots from that contract into the side arrangement with Raymond. The batch numbers match your shrink report exactly. A pause. Torres called Gaines while we were still in the room. He's treating this as corroborating confirmation of what your forensic toxicology is going to show. I pressed my hand against the steering wheel. The tox results came in this morning. I know. Dr. Farber called Patricia directly. Phenobarbital derivative confirmed at consistent concentrations across all 3 capsule samples. His written report is on its way to Gaines' office by courier. Frank was quiet for a moment. Maggie, we have the medical evidence, the digital evidence, the physical evidence, and now a cooperating witness who was present for the entire operation from the supply side. The case is essentially built. Then why don't I feel like it's over? I said. Because Raymond doesn't know it's built yet, Frank said. And until he does, he's still moving. A pause. Gaines issued a target letter to Raymond's attorney this afternoon. A target letter is a formal DOJ notification that Raymond is the subject of a federal grand jury investigation. His attorney is required to inform him immediately. Raymond will know by tonight. I looked through the windshield at the front door of my pharmacy. Helen Marsh was visible through the glass, speaking to a customer at the dispensing counter, doing her job with the same steady precision she brought to every shift. She had no idea that 2 hours north of here, the woman who had helped poison me was sitting across a table from a federal agent describing exactly how she had done it. How did Dana seem? I asked, at the end. Frank considered the question. Exhausted. Relieved in the way people get relieved when they've been carrying something too heavy for too long, and they finally set it down, even if setting it down means consequences. He paused. She asked about you. She asked if you were going to be all right. I did not answer that immediately. What did you tell her? I asked. I told her that was up to you to decide, Frank said, and that she should focus on telling the truth completely and let everything else follow from that. There was a silence between us. Outside, a family walked past the pharmacy window, a mother and 2 children, ordinary and unhurried, moving through an afternoon that had nothing to do with any of this. Frank, I said, Raymond is going to get that target letter tonight. He knows the trust is locked, the system access is gone. Dana is talking, and a federal investigation just opened. He has nothing left to lose through legitimate channels. I stopped. Which means the next thing he does won't be legitimate. I've been thinking the same thing, Frank said. I spoke to Gaines before I left Atlanta. He's agreed to something, a controlled scenario. We send Raymond an invitation to a settlement discussion about the trust assets. Make it look like Patricia is offering a quiet resolution. Suggest that if he cooperates with a structured separation agreement, we might be willing to limit the scope of what goes to the grand jury. We're not actually offering that, I said. No, but Raymond won't know that. He'll think he has one last chance to negotiate his way out. Frank's voice was steady. He'll come, Maggie. A man with his debts and his ego and his back against the wall, he'll come, because he'll believe he can still talk his way through anything. And when he does, he'll be in a room we control on terms we set with recording equipment he doesn't know about. I sat with that for a long moment. Set it up, I said. But Frank, I want to be in that room. A pause. Maggie, I want to be in that room. I said again, quietly and absolutely. Not behind glass, not through an earpiece. In the room, across the table from him. I stopped. He looked me in the eye at that courthouse and whispered what he thought was the last thing I would ever hear him say. I want to be looking at him when he realizes it wasn't. Frank did not argue. I'll talk to Patricia, he said. We'll make it work. The conference room on the 14th floor of the Peachtree Tower smelled like recycled air and old ambition. I arrived 20 minutes early, set my notepad on the mahogany table, and folded my hands on top of it, the way my father taught me to fold hands before a difficult conversation still deliberate ready. Patricia sat to my left. She had not said a word since the elevator. That was how I knew she was calm. Patricia only went quiet when she was absolutely certain of what was about to happen. Raymond walked in at exactly 2 o'clock. He wore the gray suit I had bought him for our 3rd anniversary, the one he called serious but approachable. He smiled when he saw me, that practiced, warm smile I had once believed was for me alone. Now I recognized it for what it was, a tool kept sharp and ready like everything else about him. Maggie. He pulled out the chair across from mine and sat without being invited. I'm glad you agreed to this. I think we can resolve everything today. There's no reason for things to get ugly. No, I said there isn't. His attorney, a trim man named Gerald Forsyth, opened a leather folder and slid a single document across the table. A mutual release agreement, Forsyth said. Mrs. Caldwell withdraws the successor trustee activation. Mr. Caldwell withdraws the guardianship petition, and both parties agree to a private financial settlement, $2.1 million paid over 36 months. I looked at the document. I did not touch it. Raymond. I said, do you remember the Tuesday evenings when I left the pharmacy early and you stayed late? He blinked. Just once. What does that have to do with anything? I'm curious, I said. What did you do with the time? Forsyth put a hand on Raymond's arm. Raymond ignored it. I handled administrative things. You know that. Right. I nodded slowly. Administrative things, like logging into the inventory system under RC-04, like authorizing withdrawals of a phenobarbital derivative that Dr. Simmons, your friend Gerald Simmons, co-signed without ever seeing a patient. The room went very still. That's a serious allegation, Forsyth said. It's a documented fact, Patricia replied, her voice flat and even. We have the server logs hash verified against an off-site backup. We have the batch numbers. We have the CCTV footage of your client entering the side entrance on 8 separate evenings. We have a courier who photographed a label from one of the packages. And we have 17 Medicare claims tied to patients who don't exist. Raymond's jaw tightened. He looked at me, not at Patricia, not at Forsyth. At me. You went through my files. They were my files, I said. My pharmacy, my father's pharmacy. You were a guest in it. Maggie listened to me. I've been listening for 14 months, I said. I listened when you told me the fatigue was stress. I listened when Dr. Simmons said I was aging too fast. I listened when you filed an emergency petition claiming I was losing my mind. I paused. I stopped listening when the toxicology report came back from Augusta. Forsyth leaned forward. Any toxicology results are inadmissible without chain of custody documentation. Patricia cut him off. Dr. William Farber sealed those capsule samples himself. The certified forensic lab report is all ready with Lawrence Gaines at the DOJ. The concentrations are consistent across all 3 samples and match the batch numbers from the shrink report. Your client has a problem that a mutual release agreement cannot solve. Raymond stared at the table. I watched his shoulders drop, not in defeat, not yet, but in the particular way that a man drops his shoulders when he realizes he is surrounded and has been for longer than he knew. I never intended he started. Raymond! Forsyth's voice was sharp, but Raymond kept going. He looked up at me with something I could only describe as exhausted honesty, the expression of a person who has spent too long pretending and is simply too tired to continue. The phenobarbital protocol, it was supposed to be gradual. Simmons said low concentrations wouldn't show up in a standard panel. It was just supposed to make you seem... He stopped himself, but the sentence was already in the room with us. Forsyth closed his folder. We're done for today. Seem what? I asked. My voice did not shake. I was proud of that. Incompetent, confused, easy to control. Raymond said nothing. He did not need to. He had said enough. Patricia slid a different document across the table. Our document. Caldwell Pharmacy retains all assets under the trust. The guardianship petition is withdrawn with prejudice. Mr. Caldwell vacates the marital property within 72 hours. Non-negotiable. Forsyth was already standing, gathering his things. Raymond stood too slowly, like a man lifting something very heavy. At the door, he turned back once. I thought you trusted me, he said. I did, I said. For a long time I did. He left. The door clicked shut behind him. Patricia exhaled. Outside the window, Atlanta stretched in every direction under a pale October sky, indifferent and enormous. I sat with my hands still folded on the notepad, still deliberate exactly as my father had taught me. Is it over? I asked. Patricia looked at me with the careful expression she reserved for things that were not simple. The civil part, yes. The rest, she paused. Lawrence called while you were in the elevator. Raymond's attorney is going to have a very difficult conversation tonight. I nodded. I already knew what that conversation would set in motion. What I did not know, what none of us knew yet, was whether Raymond would go quietly or whether he would do something desperate first. Frank called me at 7:43 that evening while I was still sitting at Patricia's conference table with a cup of cold coffee I had not touched. He went to the pharmacy, Frank said. I set the cup down. Which one? The Abercorn location. Calvin just triggered the after-hours alert. Someone used a bypass code on the rear entrance, an old emergency code Raymond would have known from when you added him to the building access list 2 years ago. I stood up. Is Calvin there? No, I told him to stay home. I didn't want Raymond to have a reason to do something he couldn't walk back from. Frank paused. I'm already in the parking lot across the street. Torres is 3 minutes out. I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair. Patricia put her hand on my arm. Don't, she said. He's in my father's pharmacy, Patricia. I know. Her voice was steady. And the people who need to handle that are already on their way. If you walk in there, you become a witness, or worse, a liability. I stood still for a moment, her hand on my arm, the city humming 14 floors below us. Then I sat back down. Frank kept talking. He went straight to the server room. Calvin installed a secondary motion sensor camera last week, the one Raymond doesn't know about. He's at the workstation. He looks like he's trying to access the backup system remotely. He can't, I said. Calvin isolated the backup after the hash verification attack. Raymond doesn't know that yet. There was a brief silence. He's typing. He keeps typing. He's going to figure it out in about 2 minutes. I imagined Raymond in that room, the pale light of the monitor on his face, the growing realization that every door he tried was already locked. I had walked through that server room 100 times with my father. The smell of it, cool and metallic and slightly electric, was one of the first things I could remember about the pharmacy as a child. Raymond had no business being in there. He had never belonged in there. "Frank," I said, "is he alone?" Far as I can tell, no second vehicle in the lot. Torres arrived. I heard her voice briefly through Frank's phone, clipped professional, asking Frank to stay outside the perimeter. Then the line went a little muffled the way it does when someone holds a phone against their chest. I waited. Patricia refilled my coffee without asking. I drank it this time. 8 minutes later, Frank came back. "They have him." He didn't resist. Torres said he sat down on the floor when she came in like he'd already decided. A pause. She read him his rights. He didn't say a word. I exhaled slowly. Outside the window, the Atlanta skyline had gone from pale orange to deep blue without me noticing. The city did not care what had just happened. It never did. "What happens now?" I asked. "Gaines is filing tonight. The recording from this afternoon, Dana's proffered the toxicology report, the server logs, it's enough for a federal complaint. Grand jury convenes Thursday." Frank's voice was careful, the way it got when he was managing information. Wire fraud, Medicare fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and the recording gives them attempted poisoning, Georgia Criminal Code section 16-5-60, aggravated battery. I wrote the code number on my notepad. I don't know why. I suppose I needed something to do with my hands. "Raymond's attorney is going to push for bail," I said. "Gaines will oppose it. Flight risk destruction of evidence tonight. He physically attempted to access a system that holds federal evidence. That alone is enough to keep him remanded until arraignment." Patricia leaned forward when I relayed this to her. "Good," she said simply. "I called Calvin after I hung up with Frank. He answered on the first ring, which told me he had been waiting. 'I heard,' he said. 'Torres texted me about the secondary camera.' You did well, Calvin, installing that camera." I did what made sense. He was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Caldwell, is the pharmacy okay? The physical space, I mean." "I'll go in the morning," I said. "We'll walk through it together." "Okay." Another pause. "Your dad built that place up from nothing, didn't he? I remember you telling me that." "He did," I said, 41 years. "Then it'll still be standing tomorrow," Calvin said. "Same as it always was." I thanked him and ended the call. Patricia was watching me with that quiet measuring expression she used when she was deciding whether to speak. "Say it," I told her. "I was going to say you handled today well," she said. "Both parts of it, the room this afternoon and the waiting tonight. Waiting is harder." "It is," I agreed. She walked me to the elevator at 9:15. The building lobby was empty, the security desk staffed by a young man reading something on his phone. Ordinary. Quiet. The kind of quiet that follows something large without knowing it. In the car, I sat for a moment before starting the engine. My hands were steady on the wheel, steadier than they had been in months. Dr. Farber had said the compound would clear my system within 3 to 4 weeks of discontinued exposure. I was already past the halfway point. My phone buzzed. A message from Lawrence Gaines complaint filed. Arraignment Thursday 9. A.M. Chatham County Federal Courthouse. You don't need to be there, but you can be. I read it twice. Then I set the phone on the passenger seat, started the car, and pulled out onto Peachtree Street. I had one more thing left to do, and I wanted to sleep well before I did it. I did not go to the arraignment. Gaines had said I could be there, and Patricia had offered to drive me, and Ruth had called twice the morning of to ask if I had eaten breakfast. But I had made my decision somewhere on Peachtree Street the night before, somewhere between the traffic light at 10th and the quiet stretch near the park where the road curves gently and the city briefly feels smaller than it is. I did not need to watch Raymond stand before a judge to know it was over. Instead, I went to the pharmacy. Calvin was already there when I arrived 40 minutes before opening. He had made coffee, the good kind, the dark roast my father used to order in bulk from a small supplier in Savannah who had since retired. I had no idea Calvin still kept a bag of it in the back cabinet. I did not ask how he knew to make it that morning. Some things do not require explanation. We walked through the store together slowly, the way you walk through a place you thought you might lose. The shelves were straight. The refrigerated units hummed at the correct temperature. The dispensing counter was exactly as I had left it. The previous Thursday, my reading glasses folded on top of the weekly schedule in a way that suggested the building had simply been waiting for me to come back. No damage in the server room, Calvin said. He got in but didn't get far. The workstation logged 4 failed access attempts before Torres arrived. 4, I said. 4. He handed me a mug. He never did understand the system as well as he thought he did. I drank the coffee and did not say anything for a moment. The morning light came through the front windows at an angle that made the floor look like it was made of something warmer than tile. I had stood in this exact spot when I was 9 years old, watching my father count pills into amber bottles, with a patience I had not understood then and could only now begin to appreciate. Patricia called at 10:15. He pled not guilty, she said. Bail denied flight risk and evidence tampering. Gaines was persuasive. He usually is. Trial date is set for March. Gaines thinks it won't get that far. Dana's cooperation agreement is solid, the recording is clean, and Raymond's attorney knows what the numbers look like. She paused. He's going to take a deal, Maggie. My guess is 8 to 12 years federal sentencing guidelines, no parole until 60% served. I looked at the dispensing counter, at my father's photograph on the wall behind it, him cutting the ribbon on opening day in 1974, young and serious and proud. Good, I said. There's one more thing, Patricia said. Restitution. Gaines is seeking full restitution on the Medicare fraud. That's the 17 ghost patient claims plus compound costs. It goes back to you and to the federal government. The pharmacy's name gets formally cleared in the filing. My father's name, I said quietly. Yes, Patricia said. His name too. After I hung up, I sat at the small desk in my office at the back of the pharmacy, the same desk my father had used, the same scratched surface, and the same wobbly left drawer that never closed properly, and I wrote 4 letters by hand. The first was to Stuart Briggs. I thanked him for his courage in coming forward under pressure, told him his position was secure, and included a note from Patricia confirming that the DOJ had accepted his cooperation and would not pursue charges. The second was to Darnell Webb. I told him his contract with Caldwell Pharmacy was being converted to a full-time position with benefits effective the 1st of November, and that his daughter's name, Emma Frank had mentioned, was on the list for the scholarship fund I was establishing. The third was to Helen Marsh. I told her that what she had done in that restaurant booth on Waters Avenue had taken more courage than she probably realized, and that the pharmacy was better for having her in it. The fourth letter was the one I had been thinking about for weeks. It was addressed to the Caldwell Family Foundation, which Patricia had helped me file as a 501c3 in mid-October. The foundation's stated purpose was pharmaceutical access for underserved communities in coastal Georgia, seed funding $300,000 drawn from the trust. My father had always believed that a pharmacy was not a business. It was a promise to a neighborhood. I was keeping his promise. Frank came by in the afternoon. He sat across from me in the chair I keep for difficult conversations and declined the coffee because he claimed he had already had 4 cups, which I did not believe. "How are you?" he asked, directly, not a small talk. "Steadier than I've been in a long time," I said, and I meant it. He nodded. "Dr. Farber's office called this morning. Your follow-up blood work came back. Levels are within normal range. The compound is cleared." I held that information quietly for a moment, the way you hold something you have been waiting for so long that when it finally arrives, you are almost afraid to look at it directly. "Good," I said. "Good," Frank agreed. He left at 3. I stayed until closing, standing behind the counter for the last 2 hours of the day filling prescriptions, alongside Helen and a young technician named Bryce, who had only been with us 4 months and still asked questions about everything, which I found I did not mind at all. The last customer of the day was an older man, late 70s, who came in for a blood pressure medication he had been taking for 11 years. He knew the name of it, the dosage, the manufacturer, and the color of the capsule. He also knew that my father had filled his very first prescription for it back in 1987. "Your dad was a good man," he said, tucking the paper bag under his arm. "He was," I said. He left. I locked the front door, turned off the display lights, and stood alone in the pharmacy for one long, quiet minute. Then I picked up my keys, turned off the last light, and walked out into the November evening, steadier than I had been in a long time and entirely my own. There is something my father used to say, usually on Sunday mornings before church, in that unhurried way he had of speaking when he wanted the words to stay with you. God does not close a door to punish you. He closes it because he already knows what is waiting on the other side. I did not understand that when I was young. I think I understand it now. Looking back, I was a woman who built something real with her own hands and then quietly handed the keys to someone who had been planning from the very beginning to burn it down from the inside. I told myself that trust was a virtue, and it is. But I confused trust with blindness, and I paid for that confusion in ways I would not wish on anyone. So here is what I want to say to you plainly and without drama. Do not do what I did. Do not let love or the appearance of love talk you out of what your own eyes are showing you. Document everything. Know your own name on your own assets. And if something feels wrong in a place that has no words, yet believe that feeling before you, believe the explanation someone else gives you for it. I believe that people are mostly good. I also believe that some people are not, and that the difference matters enormously. If this story made you feel something, if it made you think or question or simply want to know what happens to women like me, leave a comment below and tell me. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have not already subscribed to this channel because the next story is already waiting, thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know. And a gentle word before we continue the stories ahead contains some fictional elements crafted purely for the purpose of reflection and education. If that is not the content you are looking for, no hard feelings, step away and find what serves you best. But if you are staying, I am glad you are here.